All right, we are live. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Martinez from Creating Coding Careers, where we help aspiring developers transition into ServiceNow and web developer roles. Our next guest speaker was a U.S. Navy rescue swimmer turned software engineer. He graduated from San Diego Code School, which was what eventually turned into Creating Coding Careers apprenticeship, and worked his way up all the way into LinkedIn as a software engineer. While doing that, he was earning his bachelor's degree in computer science and even started a master's degree in computer science. I'd like to give a big welcome to Mike Ingley. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So we usually start off asking the guest speakers about their origin story, like what was that pivot moment that they turned into tech. But I was hoping you could share with us a little about your military background as well. Can you share with us what you did in the Navy and how you feel that shaped you as a person and even as a developer now?
Well, I mean, I didn't really have a choice with the Navy. I'm like a dual citizen between the United States and Finland. And in Finland, at the time when I was turning 18, I lived there. You get a letter, and that's like one of these few countries on the planet that still has a kind of a legacy rule left of mandatory military service. And I was like coming home from school and just had a letter with a bus ticket saying like, here you go, report or go to jail, basically. And there's a clause in there that people with dual citizenship or just more than one citizenship can kind of fulfill that military obligation, but with the other country that they have citizenship to. So I just looked up basically like what pays more and who's doing more interesting work and joined the United States Navy basically. And I was a rescue swimmer for 6 years. Definitely really helped me transition from being like a young kid with no good guidance to being around more responsible people and just being an adult, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because prior to that point, I didn't really have good, like, how you say, like immediate leadership in my life or people around you that are like, hey, like do these things if you want to have like a nice life, right? Yeah. Like get a job or go to school, basic stuff. And yeah, I did it 6 years. I loved it, but I wanted to get out and see what else I could do. So that's what I did, and did some other jobs while still trying to figure out like what skill sets I wanted to have in kind of the civilian side of things. And ended up like initially starting in school with a major of cybersecurity just because I thought it sounded cool, but I had no idea what it was. And in one of the intro kind of lectures I got about what the major is, they go over the curriculum, and one of the classes listed was intro to programming and logic. And for some reason, that name just like stuck out like a sore thumb to me, and it just seemed interesting at the time. So I started researching what that was, found out about computer science and programming in general, and that it pays a lot. And it's actually like, it just seemed interesting to me. So found out about, San Diego Code School and doing all of this crazy like analysis of like, what's the best option to make, code school, CS degree, self-taught. And I was like, dude, I'm going to waste so much time like doing pros and cons and not acting. So I just did all of them at the same time and started at San Diego Code School and enrolled in a CS degree at National University, which thankfully they have a great schedule for people that work full time, and you can just go on kind of nights and weekends, like weird off hours. And it was ABET accredited, so you had good engineering and like fundamentals as a part of the degree. So yeah, I just kept doing that and code school at the same time and never really looked back. I enjoyed it, and it was exactly what I wanted to be doing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So thank you for your service, Mike. Can you take us back to when you were in San Diego Code School? Obviously, you're transitioning from a military background, and I'm assuming you don't have that much tech background. And so what was that like going through your apprenticeship? I mean, was it just a ton of new information hitting you all at once? People describe it as trying to drink it out of a fire hose. Were you suffering from imposter syndrome at any time throughout the apprenticeship program? Were you second guessing yourself?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not really focused on like if I belong there or not. It's not necessarily that. It's just I try to just break things down into like really simple singular chunks of like things to focus on at a time. And it's like, okay, like today what am I learning? That's all I'm going to do. Is like, is this learning that I am doing, is it quality learning? Like, am I applying myself the best that I can be for this given task? Right. And like answering those questions usually has this kind of trickle up effect into like everything else kind of working out. And for me, like imposter syndrome and all that stuff, that's more of me. For me personally, I always kind of help myself feel confident in knowing what I'm doing or if I belong or whatever by being able to feel like that I have put in the work, like, or research or done my due diligence on a specific thing. And like, if I've truly like applied myself or tried the hardest to like understand something and like work with it, then I usually feel okay that like I'm on the right track. Right. Does that make sense?
That does. And so you're all done with the San Diego Code School. I'm assuming you went through maybe the MERN stack, at least when I went to Origin, which is
Yeah.
equivalent to what we learned in the MERN stack. So you know all about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, maybe a little bit of React. And you got your first job at 39 Degrees North. Can you explain to us how did you get that job and what was that like?
Um, at the time, Cal Jobs had a thing where if you made a certain amount of money per year, they would like subsidize 6 months of work, like at 50% of whatever the salary of the company was paying you back to the company. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
like I got a job and it was like, you know, like theoretically, let's just say 50K a year. The Cal State, California, the state government is going to pay like 25K that back to the employer, and kind of the incentive of that was like on the job type training based things. And it was just a thing that was being promoted. That was like one of these things that the staff at the code school was announcing. And it was just a lot of paperwork and painful to apply to. And I didn't see a lot of people actually trying to like get into the program, but like I just did it, even though it was like a really terrible application process with like 50 pages of stuff. But yeah, I got approved for that and used it and found someone who was actually willing to like try and use that program to let me work there for them. And they like that plus just them having a good conversation with me and ended up being okay. But I mean, it took a long time to get to that point. I was like, I think I was doing like about 100 applications a week for 6 weeks and change. Yeah. So
Sounds about right. I remember something like that too.
yeah.
I do have a question from the crowd. So this is from one of our apprentices. Her name is Anna Davis. She also is coming from a military background. Anna's asking, do you have the experience of having to transition from a military mindset to a civilian tech environment? And what was that difficult?
I mean, I have the experience, mindset to civilian tech environment. Like the transition's easy because in all the tech devs I've had, everyone treats you so amazing and everything you need to do is very clear and there's like no organizational issues and you're not stuck with like this person is making these decisions. But I don't really know how to describe it. It's an easy transition because you just get treated well. Like I don't know, that wasn't my experience where I worked in the Navy all the time. Like sometimes it was cool and you were lucky and you go to some unit that has a great leadership structure and everything's like a very nice, well oiled running machine. But in some places it wasn't the case and life was much more difficult as a result. But everything so far in my experience working in the private sector has been really good and everybody's nice and awesome. Yeah. There wasn't like really any super difficult things to figure out that like were I wish I could tell my past self, if that makes sense.
Yep. So to piggyback off of Anna's question, so we currently have a skill bridge program, and we have some people that are transitioning from the military into tech. And I can imagine that all these skills that you developed in the military have been transferable. Would you agree that in the military, your leadership, teamwork, self motivation, all that has affected your success in as a software developer?
Um, I mean, to be honest, for me, like I didn't have much carryover in this stuff. I was never like a really senior person doing like very leadership heavy stuff. Like, yeah, I would do stuff where, we're like potentially saving someone's life and things like that. But, I was never charged with like the sole responsibility for like 30 bodies and like literally no one else is gonna have any input on what decisions I make, right? Like stuff like that. Like heavy leadership stuff. I never really did any of that. But yeah, I mean the biggest factor in my success as far as like doing well in software was just getting better at writing software and studying and constantly refining and staying committed to like that growth and development process that you engage in to improve yourself.
And so the next job, so you were at 39 Degrees North, and then
Yep.
you went ahead and you transitioned to a new company called LPL Financial. And I noticed when I
Yes.
was looking at your LinkedIn profile, you were no longer working in the JavaScript, any JavaScript type stacks. You were now
Yeah.
working with Rust. Can you explain to us how that transition happened? Like, were you on the side learning Rust, or were you just applying to multiple positions and you were interested in that specific language? And how comfortable did you have to feel to be comfortable with Rust before you applied to something like that? Or did you just dive right in and be like, you know what, I'm just going to learn it?
I don't think I didn't work with Rust at LPL. I worked with Rust at the company after that and on my own on the side, but LPL Financial specifically was just Python work on like microservices, like really, really, really reduced down, like oversimplistically. It's just building really fancy over provisioned lambdas for like specific use cases.
That's right. So it was ICF. That's where you were using Rust, right?
Yeah, the Rust work there was not a result of like them tasking me with Rust. It was a Java shop with a lot of different legacy Java applications that the people who wrote, didn't work there anymore, didn't write docs. No one knew how they worked, but they did. And there was just one really strange problem that was very difficult to solve cleanly with Java at the time. And it was something related to text encoding that needs kind of the clear, explicit nature of like what a systems level language provides. And adding something in with the language that's not garbage collected it's very minimally impactful to like overall end-to-end latencies versus something with more resource consumption and like a runtime, right?
So I want to hear about the jump to LinkedIn. You're at ICF, and then I think you were mentioned to me just a little bit earlier that you first started as a contractor for LinkedIn. Can you tell me that jump, how that happened, that transition into LinkedIn?
Yeah. Like a lot of these jobs after the first two were just related to strange connections I forgot I made initially when I was just doing a disgusting amount of like reaching out and networking and like getting rejected by everybody to try and get better positions. And those things just kind of kept persisting with like random phone calls or reach outs for other things in the future when I didn't necessarily need them. And I would always either say yes or like entertain the idea and always just make time to like either interview and get rejected, but learn and get better. And eventually those no's, like one of them isn't a no. And that turns into something that's more frequently occurring combined with you working and gaining experience. And then that just kind of puts you on an upward trajectory to like improving the jobs and pay you get, right? The contractor position was the same thing. It was like a random reach out from a person that knew me and like was able to basically give me an interview for a position that they were having a hard time filling. And I interviewed with them, not expecting to do well at all, because it's like these higher tier companies are very difficult to interview at. And it's like you can do so much preparation, but it still comes down to like you just having a good day and everything lining up well to get, the yes on the decision regarding you. And that's just what happened with the contract role. And it was like an easy choice because the pay was like twice as much as what I was making before doing the Java stuff at ICF. And
Sure.
I loved working at ICF, but it was the same thing. I was going to be, I was a new parent and I'm really concerned about being able to provide a good life for my kids and their future. So after talking to my wife, like I couldn't say no without her like being super mad at me,
Absolutely. So can you walk us through what's a typical day like for you right now, LinkedIn?
It's a good question. I mean, initially just get online, monitor normal communication channels like Slack or whatever application you use to talk and see whatever, like, so where I work, I'm responsible for a couple different systems regarding like sending out marketing emails. So I'm always going to be checking like what's the status of the systems, are they working, are things broken, just kind of get that mental model running of like, is everything healthy today? Is there stuff I need to focus on operationally so that there's not like any fires in the way of me doing normal development work? And it'll also drag down the overall velocity of like my team as well, right? So I get that stuff out of the way first. Like everything's working fine, no big picture stuff to worry about, being able to deliver like value today from our systems. And then just normal emails, check calendars, see how many meetings I have. And I try to, if I'm lucky, I'll get a couple uninterrupted blocks of work and try to just make sure I get the most out of those with the given like development work that I have. And set a basic like to-do list type of thing for the day with like whatever assigned sprint items I have, and yeah, do those things, go to meetings, and hopefully at like 4 or 5 o'clock everything is done, and enjoy time with my family after that.
So how about the company culture? It looks like you're working remotely. Aside from that, what else can you speak to us about working at LinkedIn, company culture wise?
Oh, it's great. I mean, um, this is like a company that a lot of people specifically target for like really good, I guess culture, just in the way that they try to treat their employees well and like really value work-life balance and things like that. I personally wasn't necessarily like targeting LinkedIn for that, and it's just a huge benefit that I like unintentionally ended up being able to benefit from, if that makes sense.
Yep. Got a question from the crowd. This is David Opoku, one of our pre-apprentices. How do you go about managing your time working while learning another tech stack?
I mean, it's hard. The biggest things I did, I just all these things that I wanted to do, I really like was honest with myself and like just assessing like long-term priorities of where I want to go with my life and things I want to do to get me there. And you got to cut out a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily help or contribute to achieving those goals. So for like when I was doing code school and college at night, and then kind of during that code school time, I was driving for Lyft, and it was like super weird hours. I would be like waking up at like 4:30 and driving until the morning start time of code school, and then after code school is over, I'll drive during the afternoon, then go to class, and then drive like a little bit later after class at night, and it was just pain basically. But the biggest thing that allowed me to do that effectively for a long period of time was like just writing it all out on the calendar and like seeing if it makes sense, but like really sticking to that. That was the biggest thing. It wasn't really like I didn't have good secrets for like maximizing whatever period of time I had. Like sometimes I would have those moments where it's like very good quality deep work, but I'm not able to consistently replicate that. So the biggest thing I can control related to that is like, okay, well, can I at least show up for these sessions and still try, and the likelihood of me having another good period of me learning or really reinforcing something is going to be much higher if I'm consistently showing up and like trying to do those things, versus, oh, it didn't work, I'm just not going to try today. You know what I mean?
Yep. So kind of piggybacking off of David's question here,
Yep.
And the company culture also for at LinkedIn, do they support you learning new technologies? In other words, do you actually have time set aside on a day? It's like, yeah, go ahead. If you got to learn something, here's a credit card or something. Go ahead and start learning this new whatever language or technology or tool that we need you to learn. And not just LinkedIn, but maybe some of the other organizations for people that are coming in or brand new. Do you feel like that world, to the tech world, they support their employees to kind of grow within the company?
Yeah, I mean, generally I would say that they do. Me personally, like, because regardless of the company I was at, I was always studying and learning on my own anyways. I never asked for time or any of that stuff. I would just make sure that whatever work I'm assigned or deliverables I have to like, deliver. As long as I'm providing those things, nobody asks like what you're doing, right?
Yep.
If you say this thing is going to be done by next Thursday, and like it's done by next Thursday, and there's no questions about what you're doing during that process, like you can take whatever time you want outside of that, or even during the day to like learn. And that's been consistent with like every place I worked.
Nice. Just got someone for the crowd. I just saw a blast from the past, Justin Renfro. So back in 2018, when I was going to Origin Code Academy, he was the one who's helping us all get jobs. So he gave me a shout. I just want to say, hey, what's up, Justin? How's it going? It's been a while, man. We'd love to chat with you sometime in the near future. Got another question coming from the crowd. This is from Gregory Francois. You spoke about preparation. Did you have a lot of time to prep for the LinkedIn interview? What did your preparation consist of, and how long was it?
My primary means of preparation was doing interviews and failing. And I had a lot of that. I probably failed realistically, since I started, over 1,000, not joking. And
wow.
The call I got for the LinkedIn interview to the time I actually had the interview was extremely short notice, because it was super random and hey, we really need to fill this now. And it was I think it was probably the turnaround time was a day. And you try to prepare as much as you can, but the real feeling of preparation comes from repetition of for me at least, all the nerves and calmness goes away from just getting used to interviewing, right? Even if you don't make it, it's okay, because you learn so much from each interview. And once you're so used to doing them, it's not as difficult, just from a nerves and kind of excitement perspective, to manage. And as far as knowledge and feeling very confident that you're going to do well, that's just a byproduct of very, very long-term commitments of if we're talking about data structure algorithms style type of interviews, just practicing those things.
Yep.
Because it's a very specific skill set that takes a while to be very comfortable with in a broad sense. And yeah, I mean, for me personally, I've never been able to feel confident in those types of settings unless I've been practicing and developing it for a while. And obviously, before you feel completely ready, you can get lucky and have an interview where it's things that you've seen before, but the real kind of confidence related to that just comes from doing enough that you're able to see larger picture concepts and picking specific approaches or tool sets to solve that given problem, and being able to explain why you made those decisions versus remembering specific steps to a specific type of problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know if they were doing it back in the day, San Diego Code School, but Creating Coding Careers would do these challenges every morning. So we're doing these code challenges, and it's always about breaking down, like you said earlier, breaking down larger problems into smaller chunks. And it seems like that's what you got to be ready for at these interviews. But you also mentioned that you just blasted through a bunch of interviews. So I'm assuming these were actual interviews that you're applying for.
They're all real, yeah.
Would you recommend maybe some mock interviews? Let's say you're not getting as many interviews as you would like, but you probably should be exercising that muscle somehow. How about mock interviews? Is that something you feel like you would advise for or against?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interviewing with someone that's got experience with the type of interview or category of company that you're aiming for, and they're willing to put in time to help you do mock interviews for that, that's fine. But in general, at least where I am now, right? If you were to kind of plan it out, I would just try and get random interviews that you're not actually concerned about passing, to kind of just get the nerves off, if that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
And I don't mean that in a negative way towards any of those companies. It's just all of this kind of if you're focusing on a next position, it's a lot of fails, but each of those is a step, and it culminates to the ultimate state of readiness where you do get a job. But it's not a thing that just magically happens, right? So there's definitely has to be something is definitely better than nothing. So mock interviews, yes, especially if you're not going to do any real interviews or mock interviews otherwise, right? So it's definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if you go with that relaxed mindset, saying, I'm not really doing it to get the job. I'm just doing it to kind of get some experience. I wonder if you would actually interview better with less anxiety and less stress. That's an interesting thing to think about. We do have another question, and this is coming from Anna once again. I think, I just guessed you're working remote, but are you working full remote, or is this more hybrid?
It's remote. Yeah.
It is fully remote.
Sometimes they'll fly me out to Mountain View. We'll do some team stuff, but it's 99% remote.
Got another question. This is from Misael Bolanes. He is one of our pre-apprentices. What advice would you give those who are currently applying in the job or in our current job market, as competitive as it is?
It's very competitive. Honestly, like the nowadays, a lot of my advice, it's still true, but it's probably exponentially more painful because I did not do a very like finesse, nice, high probability type of style. Like I just brute forced until a tiny, tiny fringe statistic became an offer for me.
Yep.
And that is still true now, but it's definitely not. I wouldn't recommend it to other people. Like the most clear cut way that I would say, as far as getting into some type of paid role, is find an open source project that is consistently worked on by some type of company that has a dedicated team to that project, and become known in that project, and like they will convert you if you consistently provide value like to that project, right? And that's beneficial in a number of ways because you're actually working on the thing that you're going to be actually working on if you get hired, and you know exactly what it's like to work on a larger size like product that paid software engineers work on, which is definitely like a mysterious process before you get that first paid role. And it'll also expose you to kind of the styles, practices, paradigms, and all that stuff of like what more experienced engineers are doing day to day, right? Like, how do they do reviews? How do they write tests? Like, are you writing tests? Like, what style of code? Like, why are people making choices to solve the problems with like these approaches? And all of that stuff is kind of revealed to you if you put time into like one type of open source project with like dedicated resources assigned to it, if that makes sense.
Great advice. Great advice. Another question from the crowd. This is from one of our newest apprentices coming through the Skill Bridge program. He is a Marine. How helpful was the GI towards your goal?
I mean, it paid for my CS degree, so it was useful. Like, but at the same time, there was never a moment where having a degree was like a thing that unblocked me from the jobs that I had. But I mean, it paid for my degree, and the BEH money from it obviously is helpful if you're not, working some good paying type of job at the time.
I had a piggyback question about that, but I'll circle around back to it. I do have a question coming from David Opoku. It says, I don't know if this has already been okay. So he's asking about your day to day, which you did cover, but he does have a second question. How do some of the companies you worked for go about putting out a product or an update?
That's a good question. Like, I don't know. I can't really speak for the company because like there's so many engineers and teams who do things their own way, right? And everything's broken up and siloed into a whole bunch of different organizations and structures. But for us, at least, especially if it's like a potentially breaking change, we will, have things structured in layers, right? Like this is going to be our staging or EI layer, and then production is like way up here, and there's like multiple layers in between that things must go through and be tested or validated by different external like groups or engineers before being able to climb up the ladder to the next. And all of that is basically just layers and layers and layers of quality gates at like a high level before being able to go into production and like say that it's working, right? So I guess like to answer your question, just slowly and in a way that's not very shocking to production to introduce, if that makes sense. So like, let's say I have a feature, I kind of test it, but then I deploy it and something breaks, and like there's a lot of people pinging me because stuff's not working that should be working. And I have to put out a whole bunch of fires and roll back changes because, I didn't do my due diligence prior to that moment. So like whatever things you can do to like kind of minimize or prevent the probability of that happening probably are good choices for decisions to make for like introducing something as far as like an update or a product.
I want to circle back to that question. So you mentioned that the GI Bill helped you get that CS degree. I wonder if you feel that CS degree was necessary. I think you finally got the actual degree right when you had broken into LinkedIn as a contractor. And so I feel like, well, you didn't necessarily need it to get in those first 2 or 3 roles on your way up. But to get that final offer at LinkedIn, do you feel that CS degree is necessary to get offers from these larger companies?
No, like there's like a kind of a weird distribution, like at least from my experience. Um, there's a large, like around the median of like all tech companies hiring Swedes. In the kind of middle area before you start getting to like Fang or big name type companies, certain companies really care about that, and they'll literally just like talk to you, and then randomly they'll be like, "Oh, you don't have a degree," and then that's it, you're done.
Yeah.
And it sucks, but like that's just there's a lot of companies like that that exist kind of in the middle, and that's not surprising at a lower level, but at these at like Google or these places, they don't really care. But that sounds nice, but the cost and the price you have to pay for that is all the interviews are about show me, and it is not easy, right? And to be able to kind of display and show off the work that you put in to prepare for that interview and your prowess and understanding of like how to programmatically solve vague random problems seemingly made up on the fly, it takes a lot of time and work that's probably comparable to or more than getting a degree by itself, right?
Yep.
So yes, like it doesn't matter at certain types of companies, they don't care, where it is more just like merit based and like you have to pass these technical interviews. But I mean, it's good. I don't think there or like the checkbox of a degree should matter that much, because I've met really, really good engineers who don't have degrees and really bad ones who do. So,
absolutely. So, final words. What advice would you lend to anybody just breaking into tech, either transitioning from the military or from another ecosystem into tech? Last words of advice for anybody, Mike.
I would definitely try say like reach out to people who have experience and like helping people get into the space, right? Like the ecosystem you guys have with Mike Roberts and everything, and it's extremely useful and valuable. And being honest with like tracking metrics of like what are you actually doing, try to quantify that day to day in a way where you can clearly show and share with like these people who are more familiar with the process, like this is what I did today and these are the things I'm trying to do this week, and like get an audit from them on that process and like sticking to that process. It's basically it. Other than that, it's just a matter of like persistence within the process of continuing to learn until you're able to get that role, and sticking to the day to day of like sending out applications, doing networking, or like researching some project to make contributions to get your name out there for this thing, because stuff like that like will get you noticed. It just takes time and persistence.
Yeah, I think persistence absolutely is key. I'm gonna put up your LinkedIn up there for anybody who'd like to connect with Mike. Mikey, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to hear what you got going on in the future. So maybe in 2 years or so, I'll circle back and see if you're still at LinkedIn, or maybe you've created your own company by then. Mike, I'm going to let you go. I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will have another LinkedIn live session next Friday. Etta Wilson will be joining us. She is a ServiceNow guru, so hope to see you all there. Good night, everybody. Everybody have a great weekend. Mikey, thank you so much.
Have a good day. Bye.
Have a good day to you. Bye.